No pressure like being last, so please laugh loudly or clap, whatever appropriate. Thank you, thank you. So as I was thinking about how I find my true north, I realized it really comes from two places. The first is through my own experiences, of which you're getting the highlight, not the low light, not the behind the scenes, the highlights only here right now. And the others is through the experiences and stories of people that I get to meet. One of my latest adventures that I've spent the last 6 months doing is creating this book, which comes out on Friday. This is where you cheer. Yay! 6 months of lots of sweat and tears, and through that process I got to talk with 150 women from across Canada, and I want to share you some of their stories that I learned from them and my take on their pieces. This is Fiona Mcfarlane, who is a partner at Ernst & Young and head of diversity there, and my alter ego, my past story is I worked at KPMG, and similar to a couple people who have spoken here, I found myself at a point in time where my soul was being sucked to death there, and it was not my place. And Fiona, in talking about diversity, talked about a really good example of how in the corporate world, if you imagine that all the fish were salmon and then you threw in freshwater fish and we wondered why they were struggling. So she talked about really understanding what the environment is like and are the people within the environment equipped to thrive there. I was not at KPMG. This is Gabrielle Scrimshaw, who is a young female Indigenous leader. She penned a viral article on New York Times that came out on Canada Day called Canada's Hidden History, My Mother and Me, where she talked about the history with her Indigenous mother and as a survivor and her background from it. And she shared that the courage she got to write that article was because she was told by an elder that any time she stands in front of a crowd, she has in her blood the blood of all of the women that stood before her in the same spot. So I find that a source of courage. These are two women, Dr. Imogen Coe and Faye Whiteman, who, for the first time in speaking to them and in writing, decided to share stories of how they survived intimate partner abuse. Faye Whiteman's was a story of being admitted to the hospital when she was being secretly poisoned by her husband, and Imogen Coe, who had to flee with her daughters from an abusive husband. And they talked about this because they wanted to share that below the surface there are always stories that we each carry with us every day. My way of showing up is I have a practice of posting real talk updates on Facebook, and that does mean I sometimes post pictures of myself crying. This has happened before. In 2010 to 2017, there was a study done, and they looked at the companies who were raising the most amounts of venture capital in Canada. So they looked at companies that raised minimum of $50 million between 2010 and 2017. Can you try to guess how many of them were run by women? This is spoiler alert. 0. Janet Bannister's story, who led the study, was a reminder to me of why it's still so important to talk about diversity. The next two women, one is Heidi Fry, who is the longest standing MP in all of Canada. And on the right is Alison Redford, who was the first female premier of Alberta. One of the pieces they talked about is what it's like to be someone who looks different in the world of politics and whether or not that environment and the game of politics is set up to support that kind of a diversity. When I quit KPMG, I quit cold turkey and for 6 months contracted, which really meant I spent a lot of time doing yoga and reading every self-help book possible. I know my colors, MBTI, who shot my parachute, all those things. And here, what really helped me is it helped me understand what my strengths and weaknesses are and to understand what kind of environment I was going into. This is Vicki Saunders, who through SheEO is creating a $1 billion fund to invest in female entrepreneurs that is based entirely on radical generosity. So women gift $1,000 to create this fund. 1,000 women from across Canada gift this money. I love the spirit of what radical generosity and that value embraces, and I challenge myself to think about that every day. Something that Vicki also told me is the need for community, that community that you can call at 3 a.m. when you are getting a divorce or you're struggling or you've had a really highlight moment and you need someone to cheer you on. My community for that is my breakfast club. The next woman I think many will recognize. Yes? No. So this is Kim Campbell, who was our first and only female Prime Minister of Canada. And something that we talked about a lot is what does it mean to change diversity and what will it take for the next female Prime Minister to exist? There's a really interesting study that was done years ago, and it said that women will apply for a job if they meet 10 out of 10 criteria, and men will apply for it if they meet 3 out of the 10. With Kim, the conversation was, how do we encourage more women at all ranks, and how do we encourage all people from underrepresented backgrounds to put their name forward? Jill Heinerth is an explorer in residence, which I just thought was the coolest job title to have ever. Explorer in residence, that's all it says on her business card. She decided to take on this role from a very different background because she wanted to understand what it would mean to take risks on a daily basis, physical risks as well as emotional ones. And she also wanted to do something that would really challenge her basic values and beliefs as well as broaden her skill set. The last woman that we will see coming up next is the first openly gay gay person to lead a provincial party in a province in Ontario, Premier Kathleen Wynne. And with her, we really talked about what it meant for her to share a story and why she decided to use her platform for her voice. We talked about what it means to be a champion for those around you and why sharing your story can be what empowers others. What I really took away from my conversation with her is that each one of us has the opportunity to do that on a daily basis. A commitment I made last year is whenever I see an event that has not a diverse group of speakers, or when I see awards being put forward, I make the commitment to send a very kind email to organizers of the event to suggest names that they might want to consider. These are ways that we can all shift and start moving the dial on a daily basis, and I hope that these stories will inspire you to see how you might do that every day. Thank you.